I made this motorcycle pedal out of this piston rod. On Hoopty Doodle, yeah. We did our foot pegs the other day, and today we gotta fix these foot controls here on both sides. These are bent, and so they're gonna need to be repaired. That involves bending them back so that they're in a more normal position, whatever that is. I don't know exactly. All right, so first thing I'm gonna do is take off this little rubber cover here. Yeah, maybe I'm not gonna do that. All right, soap and water. Soap and water trick. There it is. It's off and it's still in one piece. I can reuse that. So now we got to bend this guy back to a normal. Now I don't know what this looked like originally, but I think it is bent right in here. Like I think this should be pretty much straight coming out, and I feel like this should be pretty much straight in relation to this guy. So I feel like this should almost be like a 90 right there. And it's straight 90, and then that's it. I'm gonna try and bend both of these. I'll probably do this one first, and I'm just gonna cold bend it, put a piece of pipe on there or whatever, and then just bend it over. All right, so I've just got a regular, I don't know what this is, 14 gauge wall piece of pipe here. Like this is 3/4 inch or something like that. Fits on there. Let's see if this is enough leverage to do something. It does bend, so. There, that's straight. Now I just need to figure out how to straighten the other piece here. So this is supposed to be straight in relation to this guy here. So we did the right thing there. There is supposed to be some bend to this, but clearly not that much. This needs to be bent enough so that this guy is straight out like that and parallel with this guy. So it should be at the same angle. So we got a few degrees to come out here with this thing. And in order to do that, I think the easiest way is to get this out and put it into a vise, and then I can just sort of clamp this down till it's and straighten it right out. Which means removing this pivot socket right here. And if we follow the linkage here, the shift linkage up to here, there is a pinch bolt right there. Undo that with a nut on top there, and that pulls off. And this whole shift linkage should come out. So let's start down here. That was loose. Look at that. That is very easily off. We got this pinch bolt. All right, so now I've got my shift linkage, I've got my clamp here, and I'm literally just going to stick it in here and clamp it, try and straighten it out that way. I'll have to test fit it and see if it made any difference. Nope, we still need to do it some more. And test fit it on here. It's better. Straighter. It still seems like this needs to come out some more. See, that's a lot better. Parallel with my foot peg here, so that's where I want it. So when putting this pivot pin back onto the bike, you'll take note that there is a groove in the pivot pin, and this is a grease groove. And so we want to grease this pivot pin before we reinstall it back onto the bike. So I wiped mine off with a paper towel to get it as clean as I could, and then I liberally applied grease to this thing. And I'm just using some high temp grease that I happen to have. And you're also supposed to apply some grease to the outside of the ball joint on the linkage. And this is basically, I assume, to help prevent water and debris from getting into the ball joint and helping to prolong the life of this ball joint. So once I had done those two things, I I wiped off any excess grease with a paper towel. And then before installing everything back onto the bike, I also applied grease to the mating surface between the pivot pin and the bike. Then I installed the pedal and screwed the pivot pin on finger tight for now. And then with that finger tight, I moved to the top part of the linkage where we have the pinch bolt, and that pinch bolt aligns with a splined rod that comes out from the transmission. On that splined rod, there is supposed to be an alignment mark, and that alignment mark is supposed to line up with the gap on the pinch bolt, and that will automatically align your pedal where it's supposed to be. And on my bike, the alignment mark was just a little tiny dot. And with that aligned, I went ahead and tightened that down snug. There are no torque specs for that pinch bolt that I could find. And then at this point, I tested it out to make sure my little foot would be happy with this alignment, and indeed it was. And with a happy foot, I moved on to torquing down the pivot pin. And to do this, I used a socket type Allen wrench, and these typically come in a set, and that's really the best way to acquire them. And this pivot pin torques down to 20 foot-pounds, which is equivalent to 27 Newton meters. And with everything basically done over here, I could reinstall my little rubber booty on the end of the shift linkage. And to do that, I utilized some soap water mixture to make sliding it back onto the linkage a lot easier. And then moving on to the other side of the bike, we find the brake pedal in similar shape. It is also bent in a very similar fashion, but the little foot contact area of the pedal is ground down. And this is all metal over here, and so we're going to have to replace this foot contact area. And in order to do really anything on this side of the bike, we're going to have to remove the pedal first. And to do that, we need to remove this sort of rear set bracket from the bike. And so there are two big Allen bolts that hold that on. Removing those allows us access to the back side of this bracket, which holds all the connection points for the brake pedal. Now, there are basically four things on the back side of this pedal. There are two springs, a big one and a little one, as well as two connection points. And so the little spring goes to the brake light sensor. So when you push down on the pedal, this activates that sensor and lights up the brake lights on the back of the bike. And so we're going to remove that spring first using a pair of needle nose pliers to pull the spring off the pedal. And then we use the same pliers to pull big spring off as well. And that big spring is basically just a return spring that when you pull your foot off the pedal, it brings the pedal back up to level. So with those two springs off, now we can move on to the rear of the pedal, and on there, that's a connection point for the brake master cylinder. And so this connection point is just basically just a pin that runs through the pedal, and then that pin is held on there with a cotter pin that runs through a little hole on the end of the pin. So remove that cotter pin using the same pliers to bend that cotter pin back to straight, and then we can slide the cotter pin out, and then slide the pin off the pedal and disconnect the pedal from the master cylinder. And then we've got another pivot pin on this side as well. This pivot pin is set up a little bit differently, and it's attached to that rear set bracket. And so the brake pedal slides off of that pin, and we leave the pin on the bracket. And so in order to remove that, there is a circlip that holds the brake pedal onto that pin. And so I use some circlip pliers to pull that circlip off, and then I can remove the pedal from the bike. And with the pedal removed, we can see the damage a little bit better. We can see the good bend in there, as well as how the end of the foot contact portion of it is ground off. So to straighten out the main rod section of this pedal, I'm going to use the same technique by putting it in the vise and smashing it down until it straightens out. And on this one, we were lucky because it straightened out on the first smash. So now we just got to fix the end of the pedal, and that means putting something new on there, a new piece of metal. So I thought this was a great opportunity to use some salvage metal from our previous Gullwing bobber build. And I have some piston rods laying around from that build, and I wanted to use a piece of piston rod for my little foot contact area. So in order to do that, I need to remove the piston from the piston rod, and I thought I would try and do this the correct and proper way by pressing it out. But that didn't work very well, and I ended up having to cut the piston off. You'll notice there are some numbers on there, and so just because it'll be interesting to have something on there, I'm going to try and utilize this aspect of it. So I'm going to cut this section over here off. I'm going to round it, everything over here, so it looks hopefully like it was always like that to some degree at least. And then I'll end up cutting it back here somewhere, and we'll just use this little section right like that, which is fairly comparable to the size of this thing, something like right around there. So this is basically what the foot contact area is going to look like. And if we look at the old foot contact area, we can see how it's put on to the main shaft of the pedal, where the contact area is basically like a little U-channel with a notch on the one side, and the main shaft there sits in that notch and is welded on either side. So my plan is to cut the old foot contact area off and grind off any residual stuff, so I just have that main shaft left. And then using the material from the piston rod, I need to notch the side of that on the underside so that I can attach it onto the little shaft from the pedal the same way the old foot contact area was attached. So I'm just going to mark where I need to cut, and then I'm going to use my high-speed grinder with a cutting wheel and cut a notch into this piece. And this is what I've got right before I put a tack weld on there, and then see how it fits on the bike. And now we can reinstall our newly repaired pedal back onto the bike, and make sure to grease that pivot pin on this side of the bike as well. And reassembly is the opposite of disassembly, of course. And then once the pedal on there, it's a question of whether or not the little foot is happy. And yes, the foot is happy. So this is one of my favorite parts of a motorcycle build, where you start to chop pieces off of it and strip things down, and the bike starts to take on a completely different personality, and you can kind of see different potentials for it. I could totally see this bike, you know, with the front of it like that. I mean, it looks pretty tracker-like just because it's missing a headlight, basically. But I could totally see this thing ripping around some city street like this.